Welcome back, guys. So I've been kind of stuck in this rut recently with my Eurorack module journey, where I was twisting knobs and generally having a lot of fun, but I wasn't really moving the ball forward in terms of actual creative output, something that I could actually use in real production. But recently I was able to turn the corner and make some real breakthroughs. So I want to share this patch with you, break it down, and generally tell you guys how I went about that process. All right, so I'm going to break down this patch for you here. So like I mentioned before, Bitbox is sort of the heart of the setup here. And what I do is I load up the samples from Logic Pro Tools into Bitbox, and Bitbox, the sample starts to propagate all of the granular synths and other kinds of modules that are out there to complete this patch. So let's get to it. The basis of the patch is really this orchestral drone here. It's just octave drones that kind of ground the whole thing. For something like this orchestral kind of vibe, it's really important that the key doesn't change too much and then it's really stable. Once you start to kind of like mess with the pitch, things get really wonky and kind of odd. So again, I'm still experimenting with this patch, but that's one thing I've learned. The other thing that grounds it is this percussion loop. This sort of is like the kick drum for typical Eurorack patches, where you've got that kick that grounds the whole patch. So that's kind of like my version of it, and I've got like two different versions. And then I've got some sound effects or sound design elements from acoustic instruments that I've recorded and also sampled that are loaded into the Bitbox, but then I've recorded them on the Nebulae, the Instro, and the Morphagene. So let me just play that for you. The first one is this like flute ostinato thing. So that's the original sample version here you're hearing. Right, that's cool. And then the Nebula has that so that's the granular sample version of that ostinato that you hear. And so you can get some really interesting kinds of effects from this, because, let me turn that down a little bit, because as you know, samples tend to be very static and they're like a snapshot. But when you load these samples into modules like the Nebula, you get a lot of malleability, the ability to control and modulate them in the way you see here. So turning that up again. And I didn't mess with the pitch too much. I think the thing that I really wanted to focus on was like the speed and the size. So right now I've only got, I don't even think I have this modulated. I was kind of like, you know, manually manipulating them. But you can see, you can easily modulate the size or potentially modulate the speed. I initially had this patch where I had this, this flute thing patched with an oscillator and especially like an LFO, but I found that the results were too predictable, and then I had to patch. I needed something to patch into the oscillator. So anyway, it got a little too wild. So I kind of wanted to have more manual control over this particular patch. So again, that's the Nebula version, and then here's the... So it's really interesting to play both of them at the same time. You know, you just get some interesting interactions out of it. All right, let me turn that down. Next, we've got the Duduk. So this is me playing the Duduk. It's definitely not in tune. So this is just a phrase that I tracked, right? And then that's in the Arbhar. So similar. So this particular one, the what I'm doing is I'm modulating the scan. I think it's, yeah, I'm modulating the scan with a real light LFO, a sine wave, and so it's kind of like really undulating back and forth, and it's also passed through veils here, so that way, you know, it doesn't go too wild. Again, I need to get more practice with this, but the challenge has been not going too out there, but at the same time, how do I make it interesting, and how do I have it change over time so that it's interesting? So it's still being worked on. I could imagine this particular modulation being nuanced with some other module, and that's probably something that I'll do in the future. So again, so, you know, interesting stuff. Again, I mean, you could do a whole lot with this. If I turn down the spray, it's a little less wild. If I start to go a little more, it starts to get really interesting. So even though the scan is being modulated with the Batumi, I can have manual control over the spray so that I can kind of perform certain things. So again, I found that this is all about what do I want to modulate and what do I want to have manual control over, because it's sometimes fun. I found that having everything be automated with various modulators, it wasn't as fun as I initially thought it would be, just kind of standing there and kind of letting things happen. It also just was a little too slow for me in terms of the change. So anyway, by having control over the spray here, I can have a little more control over the unpredictability, so that I can kind of maintain my musical vision for at least this particular patch. Okay, so let's move on. So the next thing is the strings. So this is the original. So this is the other sound engine that kind of keep things moving forward, right? So this is kind of like my hi-hat. If the percussion was the kick drum for a typical Eurorack patch, this would be like my hi-hat, or maybe this is like hi-hat snare. But I found that having this kind of rhythmic structure is important to move things along. So that's the original sample, but then you've got, and that's on the Morphagene here. Let me turn that off. Morphagene was the most difficult and interesting to, I guess, get something out of it. So here I'm really focusing on a couple of things. By the way, the Morphagene is off screen here, being affected by Starlab. It needed a little extra something because it was just kind of too forward in the mix. But just as a quick highlight, the way Morphagene works, especially because you can have large chunks of phrases along this like tape loop, and you can kind of hop between them. There's two phrases really. There's this lower part, which is the lower ostinato, and then it occasionally hits, yeah, that little that thing. And I thought that was really interesting, and I dialed this in to do that, and that has to do with the way it's morphing, just so that it hits the second phrase on the tape loop occasionally, and then it oscillates back again. Batumi LFO is modulating that particular thing in a musical way, and it took a lot of nuance to kind of get to where I want it. So let me turn that down. So that's the original, and then it's those two, and then you'll hear the yeah, just an interesting you know, results from this, from tweaking the morph, and also I think this is called Organize. That's the feature on Morphagene, where you can organize and have phrases and clips of your samples and hop between them in such a way, again, you're trying to dial it in so that it sounds musical. But the cool thing I find that is when you hear the granularized version and then the original version, and again, the pitch is the same so that way they can blend in, I find this to be super cool and interesting because you have, I mean, this is like a cool patch right here, and it's essentially kind of letting Morphagene do its thing with a bit of LFO modulation and a little bit of delay. And you hear that little thing that kind of makes it so that, you know, it sounds interesting. And again, so the morph is really where the star is, right? I'm twisting the knobs here. And so the morph is being modulated. Actually, I think I lied. I think the Morphagene is being, it's not Starlab's, it's Echoz. I apologize. I think the Starlab is the Duke from the Arbhar. So again, so the Morphagene, but this morph parameter, it took me a little while to find this being the most musical, right? And I can actually, it's being modulated now. I can go a little bit more aggressive. Actually, that's really interesting. That's really cool. Right, so I'm modulating the amount of morph that's going on. And let me trace this patch back. Okay, so there's this one. And I can go a little crazier. Yeah, just amazing. And the reason why I share this with you is because originally, you know, I mean, all of this stuff is very typically film soundtracky, but when you start to modulate these and load some of these samples and kind of play with their interactions, you get just really interesting results, and all the self-doubt and I want to say self-loathing or self-hatred even. But man, why am I just stuck on this idea? You can use the Eurorack module system as a way to kind of work out these ideas in interesting ways that are unexpected. And I tell you, I was pretty cynical when I started this. I was pretty discouraged because I just felt that I was stuck in a rut. But again, I just dove back in. I kind of willed myself back in to this particular journey, and I found that, again, it gave me really interesting results. In fact, as I'm recording this right now, I'm really digging this. I'm really digging the results of this, you know, this typical like film score, soundtrack, viola, you know, arco strings, this ostinato. I mean, this is a cool patch of in itself. That's super cool, man. I mean, yeah, I love this stuff. Anyway, that's sort of the breakdown of the, let me get that out. That's the breakdown of the patch. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And at the end of this video, I've got this longer kind of patch if you want to stick around and listen to it.